Now we have a very small exercise. You can just pass it around. Now we have a very small exercise. What we do is we take those hands of ours, we warm them up, we put it this side, and then we bring them together for Eve Hester.
Well, this is weird.
It is?
It's weird because my job is
I know.
to be on this side. So I don't normally, I'm sort of going, I feel like going, so Samir, tell me, how did you start things and how do you feel about that? Please excuse me if I reverse the roles every now and again, because it is very interesting. So tell me, where did you start? And you've already explained that.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself and tell us your journey about wherever you want to start from.
That's very difficult. I started in Ireland, and then I moved to France, and then I moved back to Ireland, and then I went to the UK and bounced around the world a little bit. Found myself in Dubai for the first time just over 10 years ago. Spent a little while here, went back to London, and finally settled in Dubai probably 6 years ago for good.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like it to be for good for the moment.
Okay.
Found a husband, found two beautiful children somewhere
You
along
found
the way. Well, I think they were sent, or we bumped into each other somewhere.
Okay, lovely.
But and that's where it is. It's very hard to know where to start with the whole life, you know. But I think perhaps you'll guide me as you've guided many guests before.
Yes. What age you moved to France first?
At what age? Oh, I was 19. It was an exchange program for my university. I went to Trinity College in Dublin.
What do you study?
English and French.
Okay.
Which was quite handy. And the decision to go was a spur of the moment one. It was raining. It had been raining. It rains a lot in Ireland, and it's not. Everybody likes rain here.
Okay.
In Dubai, when it starts raining, everybody starts jumping out the doors and standing in the hallways and jumping up and down and being thrilled. In Ireland, we don't react like that to rain because it rains 360 days out of 365.
But you said spur of the moment when it rained.
It was a spur of the moment decision to go to France because I looked out the window and it was raining, and it had been raining for 3 months. It was going to rain for another 3 months. And despite the fact that I was very happy in Trinity, I just went, I think I'd quite like to go somewhere there's a bit of sunshine. So I put on my coat and walked through the rain to the exchange office and said, I'd like to go somewhere. In fact, I said, I'd like to go to Paris. And the professor in charge said, oh, don't go to Paris. Go to Montpellier. And I said, why would I go to Montpellier? He was like, because I've got some friends there. And I went, okay. And a couple of months later, I found myself on a plane on the way to Montpellier. And I'd been there a week before I could find it on a map.
Okay.
I have been quite geographically challenged in my life. I'm getting better at it by staring at maps all the time.
Okay. But you managed to move quite a bit in spite of not knowing the geography, right?
I move quite a lot because I found that's the only way the geography sticks in my mind.
Yes. That's your way of learning geography.
But you know, the way people talk about dyslexia and obviously don't want to make light of that, but I do think that I've got a certain version of that with regard to spatial awareness and locations of things and where things are. Essentially, the introduction of Google Maps changed my life. It just has made everything so much easier. GPS, as you are the GPS, and it's fate that has brought us together because GPS changed my life as well. Before that, it was just a lot of getting lost. But I think, as you will appreciate, getting lost sometimes means you have more adventures.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of friends of mine tell me, the GPS is the best thing that has happened in their lives.
Yes. I'm sure they do. So yes,
you're the first Irish person that I'm having in the room, and I've had different nationalities and people from different countries coming over here. And one of the criteria is, people ask me, how do I select my guests? And one of the criteria is, I want to have a conversation. That is the most important, where I feel like I can learn something. So tell us a little bit about Irish people and your parents, and till the age of 19, when
Irish
you took that decision to move.
I think Irish people, there's a lot of contrasts. They're extremely practical. They're very down to earth. I'm not going to generalize here, but I mean, I think other Irish people would feel this was a fair assessment. They're very practical and very down to earth, and they don't have much truck with a lot of nonsense. But at the same time, there's coexisting in every Irish person. There's an incredibly religious soul, or a mystical soul, or a sense that there is a world beyond ours. I'll give you a couple of examples. Even in the most, we'll say, the least mystical families, we'll say, people often believe in faith healers, for example. You know, in most villages in Ireland, there'll be somebody who has a cure for warts, or a cure for ringworm, a common thing, or a cure for jaundice. And a lot of the time it's an old lady who lives up in the hills, and you go up to her, like I'm describing this. Maybe it did happen to me, maybe it didn't. And, you know, she rubs a piece of fat and says a certain prayer, and your ailments are healed, your boils are healed. And to have that coexisting, and it still coexists in a country which is full of industry, where the Google headquarters for Europe is, where the Facebook headquarters is, where financial services are the new thing, where with Brexit there's lots of people moving, lots of corporations are moving to Dublin from London, and to have all of that, and high taxes and prices and everybody talking, to have that coexisting with a sort of magic realism and perfect harmony. The spiritual world, I think, or the religious world, less so religious nowadays, but certainly spiritual, and the extremely practical, living side by side in a way that would seem contradictory, but actually isn't if you're Irish.
Are you a spiritual person?
I don't know. I think I am. At the moment, I wonder. I think it's no harm to go through your life wondering about things, and to have moments when you ask. But in the past, I was very, very spiritual, unquestioning, perhaps quite a strong faith. But I don't know that has. I don't know where that's gone in the last few years, and I'm not quite sure why. Which is why it's tricky to have these conversations.
Why?
Because I think in a sense, as a professional, as a mum who has 2 children, as a wife, as a friend, as a family member, as a resident of Dubai, there are so many things that get in the way of asking those questions that at the moment I'm parked slightly. I know that there are questions that I need to ask of myself. What do I believe in? What do I believe? But at the moment, there seems to be too much going on around me to address them.
Not now. I mean now.
I don't know that I'm going to solve them now. I think.
Would you want to reflect on it?
Well, I suppose without getting too much into detail, I was brought up a very strict Catholic, and my faith was constant through years and years. I wouldn't say that it became more of a Christian faith, because we were encouraged to be quite ecumenical. So when I was in Trinity, for example, I used to go to the Anglican service because it was on later than the Mass, and I could sleep in a little bit more. And I didn't feel that was any any difficulty. I had my own personal relationship with a God, and I didn't feel that was a problem which sect I belonged to. I did feel that there is a divinity that shapes our ends. I don't know that I still believe that. I'm just thinking about it for the moment. But to sort of have spent 3 decades of your life being fiercely religious, I would say, not just spiritual, but actually religious and actively religious. Although people would say I was an a la carte Catholic because I picked certain bits that I liked.
A la carte Catholic.
Said I'd send back the rest. So to find oneself now, and it is directly related to a lot of the scandals in the church that have taken place in Ireland over the last 15 years. The mistreatment of women, the mistreatment of children, the horrific abuse scandals, the hypocrisy.
But those are people who are not following exactly what has to be followed, right? So the religion itself is not to blame. It's the people who follow who's not doing it right.
That's what they say. But it's very hard in a sense, and to be honest, I'm being slightly careful about what I say because
I understand.
This is my story.
Yeah, of course.
And I remember what it was like when I was very fiercely believing, and how much it upset me to have people question that.
Yeah.
So, and I know how upsetting that is because faith is something that gives us strength. It builds us up. As long as what we believe in is something that's not money, that is a higher power. People in AA believe in a higher power, whether it's you call it God or Allah or Jehovah or whatever, or even if you just listen to the part of yourself. Faith gives people strength, and it gives people hope. And I would just be a little careful myself in criticizing faith or questioning it too much because it's a fragile thing.
True.
And people need it.
So I'll ask you today, what gives you the greatest hope?
My children. I think a lot of people would say that.
Yeah.
It's. I know that for people who have children, this is very obvious. But they are absolutely the most unbelievable thing that has ever happened to me. I'm very lucky in a sense because I have twin girls who are 4. And so I've had the privilege of seeing 2 little people grow from squalling infants, and every day they change, and every day they change me, and every day they blow my mind. And I look at other people's children and I see potential there. I see a sense of things will get better with those little people in the world. I just don't know where it goes wrong after that. I mean, all of us here in this room were little people one time.
Yeah.
Everybody who's grown up to do great things in the world was a little person one time. But everybody who's grown up to do terrible things was a little person one time. And I suppose when I'm musing to myself, usually when I'm in the car, I find myself wondering, what is it that happens? Is it that we don't nurture our children? Is it that we don't mind them? Is it that we don't give them enough boundaries? Is it that we give them too many boundaries? What are we doing? And I suppose I'm no different from a lot of people in the sense that this is the whole educational system that asks these questions. But I think anybody who has kids or who's responsible for children or who's a teacher is acutely aware of these kind of responsibilities. And you just go, there's somebody else's life in my hands, and the lives of the people that that person will influence. So, but mine give me hope because they're sassy and they're silly and they're funny and they're bright, and we've managed to get them to this point without dropping one, well, without breaking one, and making them, and I suppose you were asking earlier on, what are you celebrating today? I'm celebrating because they've just turned 4 last month. I'm celebrating 4 years of not mucking it up that badly. Do you know what I mean? of every day sort of thinking I might be getting the hang of this, but.
Lovely. I'd like to ask you another question now. Since you brought up the topic of parenting, if you were to reflect on the way your parents raised you, if you just look back at that.
I think they had a disadvantage and an advantage over myself as a parent. The disadvantage and the advantage was that they were younger, much younger than I was when I had my kids. And I suppose the advantage there is that they had a lot of energy. They had so much energy that they had 3 more children after me. And so it sort of went round and round again for another one and another one and another one, at which point I would have gone, yeah, that's more than enough. Thankfully they did, because otherwise I wouldn't have my siblings. But I think the disadvantage as well maybe was that I can feel that at times they felt very overwhelmed, and a sense of yourself must get lost there, which they got back. I had advantages, again, huge advantages and disadvantages, in that my parents were both teachers. So when I was 4, my grandmother taught me, and when I was 10, my mother taught me, and when I went into secondary school, my father was the headmaster. So I suppose it meant that I got a lot of attention, but I think anybody who's been through school knows that that's not necessarily a great thing to have with your peers. But overall, I think I'm very happy. My father gave me a huge love of the English language. He was my English teacher as well as my headmaster, and I really enjoyed his classes. I thought he was an inspirational teacher. He gave me a lifelong love of Shakespeare, which I know is totally nerdy and not very fashionable these days, but I'm very into that sort of thing. It was that love that sent me to Trinity to study literature, and it was that study that gave me this hunger that I have. You have a hunger for having conversations. I have a hunger for telling stories. And I tell them through what I write, and I tell them through what I film, and I draw them out of the people that I speak to, and I see stories in their eyes, and I love to bring that out. I've interviewed everybody from Tony Blair to the man in the street, and everybody has a story. Many people have more than one story, and what I absolutely love to do is to draw them out. I think I said that to you in just, I don't know if it was, I actually think it might have been in one of the drafts of when you said, what is your goal? And
why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? I'm feeling extremely odd here because in fact, nobody has ever asked me to tell my story in that way. Of course, I mean, I've got loved ones and a husband and friends, and I go, I'm going to tell you what happened to me today. But to have somebody say, tell me your story, is quite a special thing. And I'm beginning to realize that now, that that's what I do normally. I sit and I look at people's faces, and it's interesting now because there's a lot of you and there's only one of me, but when it's one-on-one, I love that feeling when people relax in my company. I'm a very non-threatening interviewer. I think people see me coming and they don't exactly see I'm trying to think. They don't see some scary like news journalist, some scary news anchor, somebody who's going to like pull all their nasty secrets out of them. Although I have been known to do that as well. But I think I do. I don't think you can fake doing what I do, in the sense that I don't think you can fake the interest. And I'm genuinely interested in so many things and so many people, because I think the core of everything I've done is the quest for knowledge, the thirst to understand the world, to understand people, to know more stuff. And I don't do that because I think it's going to be useful or make me money. I just do it because I like it. I like when my brain is constantly expanding and constantly stuffed full of interesting facts and insights about you and what makes you tick, and insights about the world, and knowing the ins and outs of political systems and climate change and color shades and musical notes and all sorts of things. It makes me happy to know things. I don't quite know why or if that's particularly useful, because knowing a lot, reading a lot, thinking a lot, listening a lot, helping people to tell a lot of stories often puts you in a position which I'm in now, where you're not really quite sure how you feel about everything. And maybe that's the natural human condition, that we learn, we keep learning, we keep opening our minds if we're sensible. But each new piece of knowledge that we gain doesn't bring us closer to overall understanding of the world. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, there's always puzzles that we don't completely fit in, right?
I think that what do I know? I just listen to people, and the more I listen to people is the more I hear that people want to understand too. People quest to know things.
Everyone?
Not everyone. In fact, a lot of people don't. A lot of people are very happy with what they know, and they don't really want to be told anymore because it frightens them. Because it is unsettling. It's unsettling to constantly reevaluate what you thought you knew about everything. It makes us uncomfortable.
When was the first time you realized you're a story hunter?
I think it was when I learned to read. I, thankfully, because my parents were teachers, they very beautifully gave me the gift of reading quite early, before I went to school. And I was a very, very, very bookish child. I read everything. I read all the time. I was quite an irritating little girl when I went to visit other little girls, because I'd go straight to their bookshelf, go, oh, I haven't read that one, and proceed to sit in a corner for the entire play date just reading other people's books and generally being a bit antisocial. Yes, I think I became a story hound by ferreting out stories out of books and reading everything that I wasn't supposed to read. I mean, my father had a study which was lined full of books, and I can't remember being told if I should or shouldn't read them, but I certainly knew I wasn't supposed to read them. And I used to sneak into his study late at night after I should have gone to bed, when everybody thought I was in bed, and grab a book about Marie Antoinette or something that had, racy bits in it that I wasn't supposed to read, and sit under his desk and read all through it, and then just read until I felt almost sick, and then carry myself off to bed with nobody seeing me. So I was definitely somebody who was sneaking around ferreting out stories even at the age of about 8 or 9.
8 or 9, okay.
And I think then I began to realize that I could tell stories. So with a wonderful friend of mine in my teens, we used to write stories, we used to write plays.
You remember the first one?
It was a skit featuring everybody we knew in our mutual friend group, and if anybody else had read it, we'd never have been spoken to again. But it was great fun. It felt very.
What was it about? You remember?
It was about. I was in a youth orchestra at the time, and it was about a fictitious trip that we took in with this youth orchestra, during which somebody got murdered, and we had to find out who the thief was. But it did feature rather good pen caricatures of everybody we knew, and made us absolutely kill ourselves laughing just between the two of us. So I remember that being very, very good fun. And then I had a very interesting conversation with a client of mine 2 weeks ago, who was over visiting from the UK because he was filming, and I was supporting his filming. And his daughter had read English at Oxford, and who'd had a parallel experience to me, in that I did find, unfortunately, that studying English at Trinity wiped out books as a source of stories for me. It was too much. I got out of there with total burnout. I never wanted to read another book again, because, there was, I don't know how many books a week were on our reading list, but it was like, you might like chocolate, but if you're asked to eat that bookcase full of chocolate every single week for 4 years, you do stop and go, I never want to look at chocolate again. And maybe that's when I started looking for my stories somewhere else, and finding them in people. It took a while, because it takes a while to transfer something like that. But yeah, I think eventually I ended up in a profession where...
So I'm very curious about that journey where 4 years of chocolate eating or book reading, whatever it is, and then you found that you are still looking for stories, and that gap. What happened during that? Do you remember your transition? Did you do different things, try to explore doing...
Well, what I did was I was in an MLit year, which was supposed to be the preparation for a PhD, and I just stopped, and I said, I just can't do this anymore. I can't read another line. I cannot look at another line of text. I don't even want to read the back of my shampoo bottle. I've just had enough now. And that was while I was living in France, because I was teaching at a French university while continuing my studies. So I had to leave that, go back to Ireland, and my aghast parents said, so what are you going to do now? Because they'd always had this child who, I went to university when I was just barely turned 17. I had always been super focused, super bright, super young, done everything super right. And suddenly I was wimping out, and I was like, I think I was 23, and they said, what are you going to do? And I said, get a job. That's what you do when you leave university. So I got a job with a TV production company as what they call a broadcast coordinator.
Why did you join that?
I fell into that because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I was actually at an event quite like this, only much bigger. And it was a forum, kind of an open discussion for the Irish national broadcaster, RTE, who at that time were in quite a lot of difficulty because a lot of things were not being done right, and there were lots of scandals, and they were doing a lot of things wrong. And in the middle of this forum where you had the four heads of the broadcaster in front, I sort of stood up and made a little mini speech and suggested to them that they address some issues which nobody had suggested to them. And it got a little bit of traction, and it was broadcast on the radio. And at the same event, a guy came up to me and said, "You seem to know a lot about television." And I said, "No, I just read the newspapers and watch television." And he said, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "Doing what?" He was like, "Well, I'll train you up. I mean, you can work for me for free for a while, and then we'll see." And I was like, "Okay, I've nothing else to do." So, long story short, I trained up as what used to be called a broadcast PA, what's now called...
23, 24 years old?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's now called a broadcast coordinator. So I was the blonde lady that counted backwards for a couple of years. And at the time, I mean, television's quite sexist. It still is quite sexist. And it especially was then. But I didn't mind, because the perception of a broadcast PA was of a blonde bimbo who couldn't do anything except count backwards. So I'd arrive for work and I would just sort of sit in a studio or in a truck and go, 10 seconds to air, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2. And then people who had far more responsibility than me would start actually doing things when I hit 0. And but for a couple of years, all anybody did was pat me on the head and go, "Nice counting, Blondie." and I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was so done with being smart. I was so done with it. I just wanted to be an empty-headed blonde who counted backwards and had quite a glamorous job, because I could travel around a bit and got to know cameramen, and they're far more glamorous than the people in front of camera, as everybody knows. And you got to be cool and sort of smoke cigarettes around the back of the van and say things like, "Yeah, the talent. Yeah, the talent's just ridiculous today." And it was so much fun. It made me really happy.
Lovely. I just want to share something with you over here. Something very similar to what happened to you in that room when you stood up and spoke.
Yeah.
The reason why you're here today is for a similar reason, actually.
Really?
You spoke in, I keep following you on some groups, UAE freelancers.
Yeah.
And the way you respond over there, the way you show up over there is the reason why you're here today. So usually, every featured guest is referred by somebody, or somebody tells me that this person has to be featured. For me, the way you showed up on that forum and the way you put your ideas across, I thought, I'd love to have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you very much. Sometimes I do like my Facebook, and I do like my conversations on Facebook. It's interesting that you bring it up, and it's a wonderful subject to discuss, because we're negotiating the online world in a way that we've never had to before. And we're all making mistakes. We're all growing up together online.
Yeah.
I'm so flattered that you think that. Because
it's not just about what you say. There was some scene over there, I don't remember what it was, where there was a misunderstanding, and how you handle that misunderstanding is what I loved, really. And this is a message for everyone, actually. There are always people watching you, what you do online. And
it is. There was a wonderful one yesterday. Now the thing is, I have been known to grab a mallet and play whack-a-mole with people sometimes, and usually it's with people who are trolling. Like, so sometimes I do just, there's nothing you can do except grab a mallet and just go whack. It's down. I'm not engaging with you. But I think that, I would like to think that that kind of response from me is becoming rare. We all have moments. But I do think that discourse online has become appallingly corrosive, a lot of it. I think that we can be our worst selves when we're in front of a keyboard. I think we can be our best selves, but I'm not sure. I think sometimes the masking, the remove of the keyboard can make us. Somebody said that it had the, like, being in front of a keyboard had the same disinhibiting effect as 2 units of alcohol. So every time you sit down at the, I don't ask me where I heard that, but it made sense to me that every time you sit down at a keyboard, no matter if it's 9 o'clock in the morning, your disinhibition levels are the same as if you've had 2 units of alcohol. In the sense that people are far more inclined to share online, to share personal things online, to get into arguments online, to be belligerent online, to be insulting and critical and speak sarcastic and
responses.
yeah, and speak without thinking.
Yeah.
Um,
Because they're hiding behind a.
but it's not that
cannot-
they're hiding; it's
No, I mean,
because there is a
it's-
barrier.
There's a barrier, yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
and you kind of feel that that's probably the cause of quite a lot of misunderstanding. So I do try and keep my language to the. I'm a huge fan of language. I might have gotten tired of books, but I never got tired of language. And I eventually went back to books, and I do read a couple of books a month now. But as I said to my lovely husband, who studied economics and so hasn't read as many books as I have, I actually said to him one time shortly after we got married, I was like, honestly, every novel I pick up now, I feel like I've actually already read. Because there's so,
Recycling the same material.
But sort of going back to the language thing, I still absolutely adore language. And I feel that if you choose your words carefully, you can make a statement that has nuances and that is, how do I say it? That makes a point, and makes a point that's yours, and makes a point that's salient, without getting into slanging matches. I had a lovely one yesterday. As you might probably guess, my favorite person in the world is not the current president of the United States. There was a meme yesterday which was from The Handmaid's Tale, which featured Mr. Trump with, the iconic handmade helmet and the caption "of Putin," meaning that he was sort of the handmaid of Putin. And a friend of mine who really loved the book objected really nicely to the way that she felt feminism was being disrespected by this. And I pointed out that perhaps she could look at it this way. And then she said, oh, well, yes, actually, I could look at it this way. And then somebody who's been eavesdropping on the whole thing wandered in and said, I just want to say, ladies, thank you for that. Rather than, and she just said, thank you for that, the way that people exchanged ideas in an intelligent way, without getting into, well, you're an idiot if you think that, and you're this. I think we've got so much extra knowledge, but we're so intolerant of each other. And I'm not putting myself aside from that. I've been known to just be an idiot. But you know what I think I've started doing is realizing that you can actually apologize for being an idiot. Just because you offend somebody either in person or online, you can actually apologize and say, look, I'm really sorry, I misspoke, or I didn't misspeak, I said bad things because I'm a fool. Would you mind forgiving me, and could we please start again? And most of the time people respond to that.
Yeah.
To finish on the online thing, I think we're all growing up online. I think younger people, like people who are in their teens now, will never know any different. And I think they're actually nicer to each other online than us older people are. I don't, and maybe I'm talking rubbish here, but I think we're all learning that, just because somebody insults you online doesn't mean that that gives you carte blanche to metaphorically burn down their Facebook house or whatever, and we can apologize and we can move on and we can treat it like the real world, because it is the real world, and that's where we're going from now on.
Yeah.
So,
questions? So we open the floor for some reflection.
For you to answer or not. Okay, but in everyone's life, especially the storytellers, there are stories that meant to be untold. But at certain time, you feel like it's time to release that story. Is there a story you had that has been untold, and you feel like sharing it today?
that I have from me.
That was at some point in time untold story, not supposed to be told story. Because each one of us has stories that are untold, not yet to be told. It's time to share it. Did you have that story where no one knew about it until certain time, now you can release it?
Are we talking about one of my stories or one of someone else's stories?
One of your stories.
Oh, goodness. To be honest, I'm actually quite open. I do tend to blather most stuff. Let me have a think, and as we go to a next question, I will let it kind of think, and I'm sure I will think of something that I haven't said before. But just so we don't all sit here while I go, for 5 minutes. Will we have another question and then...
Do you agree that in each one of life stories that are meant not to be told?
Meant not to be told? It depends on the audience. Now, so for example, that I can answer. I mean, it's
and I'll tell you why I'm asking this question, because some people believe that if you have stories that are not told, it means because you have block in your personality, you have problems. But I believe some stories are meant not to be told. They're not meant to be shared. They're meant to be learned from, and they're not meant not to be shared. So what's your intake on that?
I think there's a difference between telling your story to a person and articulating your story. There have been times when there have been things in my life that I didn't particularly feel like sharing with the people around me at the time. I wrote them down. For years, I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I found nobody handwrites anything anymore, but I loved handwriting with a proper blue Bic biro. And I could sit down and spend an entire evening, like 5 hours, just writing. If there was something that was on my mind, if there was a relationship that was going wrong, whether with a boyfriend or with a friend or whatever, I found for me, articulating the problem was often the solution. And quite often I would keep those pieces of paper. Sometimes I could write 18 foolscap pages in an evening, just telling my story. I'm not joking. I'm like, this is totally spontaneous. But I would write 18 foolscap pages telling my story to myself. And then I would read back over it, and I might keep it for some of them. Like, I had stacks of stuff. Some of them I kept for 10 years. Some of them I would just cut up and throw away. But once they were cut up and thrown away, I felt they were dealt with, if you know what I mean. So I do agree with you. I agree that there are some stories, in fact, I think many of us have at least one or two, that don't need to be told to another person. But I do feel that we can be our own best friends. And I think that we know more than we think about what is right for us. And I found that by writing my own stories, I found, and then reading, and then parking them maybe for a week, and then going back and reading over them, I found that I found solutions from my own head. If that answers your question.
Beautifully,
Okay.
yeah. Lovely. Yep. Another question? Sorry? I love the way that you just touched upon that articulating the story is a solution to the problem most of the time. It's,
Yeah, it was funny. Do you know what? I didn't. I was very much on board with what you, with what the ethos that I sensed from you, Samir, when you first contacted me. If you note, like I didn't come along last week because I was like, actually, I quite like this to be a bit spontaneous and a little bit, you know, not be prepared. I didn't ask you for any questions. I didn't really want to know very much because I did sense that this was going to be quite. It was going to work better if I didn't have a load of things that I sort of thought about. Well, I thought if there was one thing that I felt it was important to say this evening, it is based on you, sir. It's that people. I used to be great at giving people advice. I used to be fantastic at telling everybody what I thought they should be doing with their lives. And usually I was right. I mean, objectively, I think I was right quite a lot because I'm quite a sensible person. But it never made a shred of difference to how people behaved. And I believe that what people really need if they have a problem is to articulate their problem to somebody who cares and who wants to listen. And who will give them the space, the physical space, as in the time and the silence and the comfort, the emotional space, like I'm emptying my mind and I'm not going to give you should words. I'm going to just sit here and be present with you while you articulate your issue, while you talk through your issue, while you find your solutions. And I think that's what most people need. And unfortunately, most people don't get that unless they pay for it with a therapist. Whereas I think the greatest gift we could give each other is to sit and listen and give people the space. My husband does that for me. I mean, not all the time, but I think it's one of the greatest gifts that he gives me is that he sits and he listens to me talk. And I talk a lot. And sometimes I do talk too much and he has to stand up and say, I'm going to bed now. But I will say the greatest gift that he gives me is to listen while I talk myself through my problems.
have you heard of the lamppost metaphor?
What?
The lamppost metaphor.
No.
So if there are people who cannot afford a coach, what they say is go in every day after you finish your work, go to a lamppost and talk to it. Just talk. And this is exactly what you're saying, articulate. If you don't have anybody in your life to speak to, go speak to a lamppost, but speak.
Yeah.
And
some people speak. A good friend of mine once said that like people have different ways of doing it. Some people speak, like actually, some people solve their problems by hearing themselves talk. Some people write. A lot of, I mean, as I said, like especially a while ago, I solved a lot of my issues by but it didn't work if I typed. I had to write longhand and just write until I had cramp in my wrist. Some people sing. I mean, I actually do know one person who sings. What other ways could you do it? But I do think like if you articulate it, or you write in different languages, or you speak in a language, and if you speak more than one language, you find the language that's better for you. I lived in France for quite a long time, and I found a lot of the time I was more comfortable. For a long time I was more comfortable talking about emotions, like as in dating emotions, boyfriend emotions, that sort of thing, in French, because that was that period of my life where I was living there, and you know, it's the sort of early 20s, sort of first like dating scenarios and stuff like that. That disappeared. But you know, sometimes it can be context, and you can be more comfortable articulating certain things in certain languages. So like you might be more comfortable talking about yachting in French because you learned it in French, as an example.
what was I going? Oh yes, I think the way that you were expressing that you were writing it, bless you, it's your release mechanism. And as you were saying, some people say they speak it, they sing it, they paint it. Even in their writing, they might write poetry, stories, whatever. The point you made, which I found really interesting as well, I share what you said in that I like to talk a lot. I like to give a lot of advice and guidance, which is why I think coaching was perfect for me. But the thing I had to learn was to listen. And I think the part when you start activating that part of you to listen and allow the question that you're asking, which is what I think the magic of this, when Samir asks a question and he lets you come up with your own answers and do your own therapy, if you like, I think that's what you, when you're interviewing someone, that transfers into that connection. And I'm very interested to know, when you go into an interview, do you really actually prepare all the questions that you're going to ask? Or do you let it flow and just kind of, as an impromptu, if you can make it impromptu, how do you prepare to make it authentic, but to also ask the questions that are on your mind that you really want to get into the, nook and cranny of?
So it depends. Sometimes, for example, if it's for a very specific purpose, like this morning's shoot was very business oriented. It was for a particularly business oriented film that needed specific questions answered. In that case, you do stick to the questions. And for me, in that case, I rely on my own reactions to the answers to create a connection and to put somebody at ease. I definitely would, even today, I definitely threw in a couple of extra questions following up on that because it's interesting. And you can only answer follow-up questions if you've been following what they're saying. So that's how people know that you really are listening. There are certain scenarios, though, where I say I really would prefer that we didn't. The difference with me, I think, is that with cameras, people find it difficult to forget about them. So a lot of people quite like having at least some idea of what you're going to ask, simply because it helps them to prepare a bit and stops them feeling far too self-conscious in front of a camera, so that they can explain themselves and come across well. So in that sense, the camera is probably the enemy of spontaneity, really, of people being real, because in a way, it's the thing in the room that stops people from being real, because everybody's quite conscious of it. And yet, at the moment, the focus of all reality television is to pretend that a camera isn't there, which means that you've got a whole generation of TV stars who are masters and mistresses at behaving naturally in front of a camera as if the camera isn't there, while being completely aware that a camera is there, which is the most unnatural state that a human being could possibly train themselves to be in. My job, for example, one of my favorite early jobs ever. So after I did my couple of years of counting backwards and having an empty head, I suddenly started to wake up again. It was like the sort of clever intellectual storytelling part of my brain had a bit of a nap, and then it decided that it wanted to wake up again. And I started to say some interesting things, or at least vaguely intelligent things, around people who could promote me. And they started to take notice and kind of go, actually, that blonde girl that counts backwards, she might actually know a couple of other things as well. And I started being given little bits of responsibility. And my first proper responsibility was a little mini series that we filmed in the National Stud in Ireland, where they breed horses. And it was about following a mare who was just about to have her foal, and following the various different stages of how you knew she was about to have her foal. We sat in the stable for a week of nights waiting for that foal to be born. We were like expectant dads going, "Come on, mom, get on with it." um, and and we followed those stories all the way through. And I remember thinking, like, this is where I want to be. These are the stories that I want to tell. And our characters, this was at the very beginning of reality TV, if you know what I mean. It hadn't become such a trope at that point. And the people who worked in the National Stud, they were the most down to earth, shy, ordinary, self-effacing people. I remember one of them was called Nuala, and she was so shy. It was just amazing to see her. And I just found that when I was hanging around with them and asking them questions, they forgot the camera was there a lot of the time. And they forgot the camera was there because they were, I know this sounds like it sounds terrible, like I'm bigging myself up, but they found that there was somebody who was interested enough in them to give them that connection and to tell their stories and to open up and start speaking. And it was the most wonderful experience it was the most wonderful experience, and it was that made me go, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to give people that space. But to go back to your question, with those people, I never had a list of questions. I would just sort of hang around with them and say, so what's the horse doing today? And then they'd tell me, and then they'd tell me a little bit more. And just the way they were able to, we'd put a radio mic on them and let them wander around. This was before the current wave, this is before that sort of thing became normalized. Like, this is what, 12, 15, 14 years ago? So, that sort of sense of, wow, we can actually make people forget the camera's there, which is the hardest thing. If you want to do a reality TV show, there's enough people who've trained themselves to act natural. But the real trick, I think, is to have people that forget the camera's there. And that's my job.
Lovely. What is your journey heading towards?
Don't know. I think...
what would be a big win for you? Or
What do you want to celebrate 1 year from now?
not 1 year, I would say 10 years from now.
Well, I think, to be honest, like many people, Dubai has become a scary place, in a sense. There's a lot of people leaving. There's a lot of people losing jobs. There's a lot of uncertainty. Maybe it always was a scary place, but maybe it always was.
But it's the case everywhere in the world right now.
Yeah. I think that there is a sense that there's
a sense of uncertainty everywhere.
I think there's quite a sense of uncertainty among a lot of people here at the moment. Maybe it's because a lot of us are far from home. We don't have the kind of community supports. But I would say I would quite like to feel a little more stable, and that would be, to be honest, for the sake of my kids. I'd like to feel.
You would never go back and settle down?
Go back to Ireland. I think Dubai is our home.
Lovely.
I mean, my husband's Pakistani. My kids are Irish Pakistani. I think they fit here. I think I love this place. I love the fact that it's a multicultural melting pot, to use an overused cliche, but
yeah, it's hot. It is hot.
But it's just to have that feeling that it's home for us.
It's a lovely place.
But how long can you stay? That's the question. Like, you've got to have an end plan, and I would quite like all of us, I suppose.
Take it as it go.
No, I'd like to have a big nice retirement home at the end of the whole thing. I mean a retirement home, as in a home with other old people and enough money to pay for it. And not to be a burden on my kids. And actually, even that is, in the modern world, you are right, it is the same everywhere. You know, our old pension plans are being eroded, and it's not as easy to have a secure old age.
Yeah.
And I know nobody wants to talk about old age,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do worry about. I mean, like, I think we all do. You worry about what's going to happen to you. You worry about what's going to happen to your kids. You worry about all sorts of things. When you have kids, you just add about 1,000% of worry to your life.
Sure.
10,000% of joy, but like quite a lot of anxiety as well.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of the first session.
Thank you.
There's something that I have not mentioned over here, which I skipped to mention at the very beginning of the session, which is when people come in over here into the room, I ask always to, I know it's a little bit late, but still, focus on the message and not the messenger. See what it is that you can take away from the message and apply the principles of ACT. A stands for apply. See what it is that you can apply. C stands for change. See what it is that you can change about the way you're doing things right now. And T is teach. Teach someone from what you just heard, if there is something that you take away. And if you don't do any of these three things, then what happens is it just becomes noise in your life. What you just heard becomes just noise in your life. And you don't want that. What I want you to do is, for a moment, while she picks a card over here, reflect and share with us what were your big aha moments. We have a small ritual over here where you pick a card. So during the first session of Awesome Walkers, I was gifted this deck of cards where it says, it takes just one insight to change your business forever. So it has a lot of quotes on the other side. You just pick one, reflect on what it says. So just pick one, look at it. Meanwhile, we'll take the reflections from the crowd, and then you can reflect upon yours.
Okay, cool.
All right.
By the way, can I just say thank you? I was actually quite worried about speaking, but your wonderful, encouraging faces have been fabulous. Thank you.
Can I comment on that? Because I can't hold this. When you first sat, you were at a very defensive position.
Yeah.
And now you're so comfortable.
Yeah,
You feel
yeah.
like this.
Yeah, no, it's fab. I could stay here all day. I won't.
Slowly sink into that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been a wonderful experience. So thank you guys all. Thank you.
Just hold on to it. Don't say. I'll take reflections first.
Yeah, the first reflection, not ACT, it's a reflection. I was impressed, I was amazed that the minute the conversation strikes, you put your faith on the table and you put who you are. You just put faith first before business, faith first before family, faith before you. And I was like, wow. She just said what she wants to say. This is where I come from, this is my principle, this is what I hang on with. So I believe when life goes really bad and knock us down, just hang on faith. Leave out your experience, leave out yourself, just hang on faith.
Lovely.
You'll stand up again.
Sort of three things struck me quite a lot, what you said. It's very different to talk than to articulate. That was something very unique, and it's important whom you're articulating it to. Someone who cares and who can listen and also give the space both physically as well as in terms of time. I think that was phenomenal in terms of takeaway from what you just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you.
The fact that you let your natural release process just play it out and let it organically just cleanse whatever was happening in your mind and in your life, you found what released your anxiety or your thoughts. So it's, my takeaway is, let your natural release process present itself and don't fight it. Let it just play out for as long as it did. You were sick of reading, then you found your passion and your storytelling, and that journey took off. So that natural release process, just let it be. So that's my takeaway. Thank you.
Lovely. Yeah.
So, the reason I'm taking this mic is because I saw a lot of young people in this room, And only just going from what you have said and my own experience about how important it is to keep writing. We today do not write enough until school. I think right after that, even maybe a little bit of university, we stopped writing. We started typing, and even our phones and even our messages, everything. But when you start writing everything down and you have a conversation, whether it's even talking to somebody else or yourself, it's a phenomenal experience. And I would just encourage all of you, there are so many of you who are young and just coming up, please continue writing even after you're done from university and you don't require a pen. Buy yourself a nice ink pen, write, and it's really nice. And something she touched upon about how you get answers from within. Rumi has touched upon a number of his statements say that he was looking for God, or he was looking for divinity, and he always found it within himself. That's just it. Write and you'll get your own answers, and that's one way to do it. There are other ways of articulating yourself, but please keep writing. That's all I'm going to say.
Lovely.
Also, language is cool.
Hi. I still write a lot. Like, the long handwritten stuff, it's very therapeutic. But other than what I like, why Samir brought you over here is the reason he saw your messages. I mean, you spoke about Facebook. We are so much in a hurry to convey what we have to say without giving it a thought. And also in 2 sentences, we tend to be harsh at times as well. But I like, how you actually take time with the example you gave. And so when somebody sees that, at least it's like a motivation, or at least an example to be that way. Give it some time. Or I think we're just too much in a hurry to just say a lot of things. Because, you have a platform, you have to give your opinion and you just be done with it. If you have such examples where people are at least a bit thought through, I think it's a nice thing to do.
Lovely. We'll take the last one because we're running out of time.
I think I will actually extend it from where she had mentioned, actually. And I'll give you my personal example. I have been also writing a lot in terms of diary. Well, I'll give you an example which happened just recently, and I was just thinking of that. I do also at times write emails, long, what is going on in my mind, and I do not send it at times. I hold on and let things evolve. And just day before yesterday, I wrote a long email to someone, and it was the address was there, and I said, let me remove the address first before I shoot it out. And something happened yesterday which made me to feel that email is absolutely redundant today. In 1 day's time, things evolved, I evolved. I think that's a brilliant way of looking at things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Would you like to reflect? Yeah.
Just one thing.
Yeah, sure.
While everybody's been talking about writing, and you said buy yourself a nice pen, and I'm a great follower of Tony Buzan, who's into mind map, and he says go in for as many colors as you like. So some of my best thoughts come out in pink color or magenta or green or whatever. Just have fun with those colors even when you're writing. So please, this is
lovely.
just some addition thing which I want to say.
And before you reflect on what the card says, what was your aha moment today? Did you have any, or did you?
I've really enjoyed this. The gentleman who's was sitting here, I think, put it best. I'm not, as I said already, so I won't repeat myself. It feels strange to be the interviewee, very strange to me. The fact that all of you lovely people have had the patience and the kindness and the courtesy to listen to my story and my insights, such as you call them, has been incredibly gratifying for me, incredibly, I would say, healing in a way that it's so lovely to be listened to. You guys have given me that space that I talk about, and so thank you very much for that. It was wonderful.
What does the card say?
I don't actually agree with this. No, because it says, in life as in business, you can make a living, make a difference, or make history. And I think you can do all three. I think, and I'd like to think, I mean, I'd stop short quite at the making history bit just yet. But I have interviewed some quite senior people, so I suppose I'm part of that little bit of history. But you can make a living and you can make a difference together, certainly. And we are all each other's history, so I think we can all make history too.
And it reflects with what you do as a job as well.
Yeah.
Recording history.
It also, reporting it, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that I'd remove the or,
Yeah.
and I'd say
Yeah.
in life as in
Spelling
business,
mistake, yeah.
you can make a living, make a difference, and make history.
Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
so
thank you,
much.
thank you.
It's been an absolute
Thank you.
privilege.
Thank you.